Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished entrepreneur, knowledgeable scholar in our scriptures, someone who's doing some incredible amount of work in different parts of the world, talking to us currently from Uttarakhand, India, Mr. Ajay Chaturvedi. Ajay, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. Um, Delighted to have you for a second time. Ajay is the founder of Harva, KFN, and the Kulhar economy. But we're going to speak to him today about his books. He's the author of the Trilogy of Time series. His book one is titled The Kaal Darshan, Building Blocks of Time. And the second book two is about Kaal Gati, which is the cosmic flow of time and history. And was recognized by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader. So, Ajay, let's start with the first question. What was the inspiration to write the Trilogy of Time, and what role does spirituality play in understanding the nature of time?
Thanks for getting right into it, Ashutosh. And one of the things that I genuinely admire on the show is that your ability to just sift through everything and hit right there.
Thank you.
You
Thank
don't have this journey essentially started back in business school, where and this is like probably the best business school in the world, and
you.
you're taught that the most important thing in strategy
Mm,
is timing.
mm,
And so naturally, your second question is, okay, great. So how do I determine timing?
mm,
And naturally, the answer is, well, it comes to experience, it's a gut feel and whatnot. That was the curiosity seed that sort of germinated at that time.
mm,
I just kept wondering, how is it that we can't even determine if it's the most important thing and it just goes by experience and gut feel?
mm,
But then there was also this thought that, in Mahabharata, for example,
mm.
Duryodhan goes to Nakul
Yeah.
and he asks, what's the best time to start the war?
Mm,
And now this is the interesting part, right? Because you start to understand they're from opposite sides of the camp, they're
correct.
fighting each other. But this is where the whole idea of dharma comes in. So he's
Mm,
a brother, so he can't refuse him. Because he's a Jyotishi, he can't say, he can't lie. So he has to tell him it's Abhijit Murat. And I'm thinking, that's 5,000 odd years ago, and
mm,
they knew exactly when to start the war, and then Sri Krishna comes and intervenes and whatnot. But the important thing is, Muhurta Shastra is something that has intrigued me for a long time because that's
mm,
something that we start with. So that was the starting point
mm.
20 years ago, 20 odd years ago. And that has sort of led me to one thing after the other,
Wow.
launching Arva, KFN, and here I am now.
Wow. 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 And before we started recording, you were telling me about your project that you're building a Vedic village.
Yeah,
How do you connect the Vedic perspective on time
yeah.
with the modern scientific concepts?
Okay, so I'll again taking your cue, I'll go right through it, right? Because I'm a critical thinker,
Hmm,
like most of us are, right? I mean, if
hmm,
you've done something, you realize that it's your ability to ask the what, how, when, where, who, all that questions.
hmm,
So
hmm,
my questions have always been, okay, if India was the wealthiest nation, Sone ki Chidiya, how did we get to this place?
hmm,
We've heard like Alexander the Great, Columbus discovered America, Hitler was killed, and then here we are. What happened in the middle?
hmm,
Why did colonization begin in the 15th century?
hmm,
You just told me like historical facts. Okay, historical fact, 15th century colonization began, 7th century Islamic invasions. So you naturally question why 15th century, why 7th
hmm,
century, and then you start to drill.
hmm,
Okay, and there's got to be an event, a trigger. Neeraj Chopra just didn't compete in the Olympics. Like one fine day, he got up and okay, great. I need to learn to throw the javelin. And
yeah.
there has to be a trigger. Like, what was that trigger?
Hmm,
And when you start to drill deeper, you fundamentally come to the same questions because of late, I think Dr. Somnath of ISRO has commented that all of science comes from the Vedas.
hmm,
And so again, somebody like me is like, okay, great. Tell me where does it come from? Give me
hmm,
the source. Where is it quoted? All that. So parking the 15th century and the 7th century
hmm,
aside, then you start to question the whole narrative. And you finally get to the specific point. If Rishi Pipalad had already discovered and talked about gravitational pull, what exactly did Galileo and Sir Isaac Newton discover?
hmm.
Besides the fancy story, forget
Correct.
the story, Apple falling and all that. He had already described the idea of Apanavayu pulling you because of the Gurutvakarshana.
Mm.
And Newton essentially and Galileo gave a rate of that change.
Mm.
Okay. So you say, okay, great. If these guys, now again, taking this two steps further, there is extensive description of time and analyzing of what time is. Every Purana, for example, which has been called mythical, when you start to read it, every Purana talks about time.
Correct.
It talks about the very specific unit, and they are not talking about like seconds and minutes. They're talking about micro units of time,
Mm.
like the blinking of an eye, and everything is connected to nature.
Mm.
Then it finally gets to Ghatika and everything. And so, in detail, if you read Ramayana, for example, they're talking about time very specifically. Raja Darshan does rituals from one Vasant Ritu to the second Vasant Ritu. They observe at Brahma Muhurat. They're like very specific. If they
Mm.
miss the
Mm.
Muhurata, so you're convinced that these guys knew about time.
Mm.
So what prevented them from taking a rate of acceleration?
Mm.
Was Newton. So the study has now sort of drilled down into one thing. And that's when I got to, if the second was used 9.8 meters per second square,
Mm.
where did the second come from?
Mm.
The story goes, it's 60 seconds is 1 minute, 60 minutes is 1 hour. So 24 hours. And now naturally, okay, why 24 hours?
Mm.
Because we are predominantly a decimal system.
Mm.
And when you start to drill into that, the Google would tell you that it's a Greco-Roman concept, but there is absolutely no proof to it. There is no scripture that documents it. Talk about the Book of Dead, Epic of Gilgamesh, many, many scriptures. So I scrolled through a lot of those books.
Mm.
Finally, you get to it that the only place where the time definition, 24 hours, comes from is the Vedas,
Wow.
right? That is where the whole thing started. Okay, so why 24 hours? If 24 hours is coming from there, why aren't we using 24 hours?
Mm. Mm.
Nowhere, have they mentioned 24 hours. They always talk about the Ghatika, the Muhurata, all that. So there are 30 Muhuratas in a day,
Mm.
sunrise to sunrise. And then I started to ask the same questions, how does the day change at midnight?
Mm.
What's fundamentally changing at midnight if it's changing the day?
Mm.
Because the Vedic day changes from sunrise to sunrise, right?
Correct.
And then you start to ask, then they say weekdays are mythical. Well, if they are mythical,
Mm.
why are we using them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So
Mm.
then you drill further, you realize Russia did this experiment of doing away with the weekdays. There are like many, many kings who've actually done away with this and
Mm.
it failed in about 20, 25 years.
Mm.
And they finally had to revert back to it because the economic collapse would happen, certainly.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
So the Vedic connection is that the Vedas are the only place where the definition of time stands.
Mm.
Today, if we lose the Vedas, after about 20, 25 years, we'll completely collapse.
Absolutely right. You're
That's
absolutely right. And I'm completely on board with you. But on a lighter note, you know, the Vedas and our language, whether Sanskrit or Hindi,
yeah,
uses the same term for yesterday and tomorrow,
exactly.
which is Kal,
Yeah, Kal, right, right, right.
isn't it? So there's often also a question of timelessness in our
Right.
the way
Yeah.
we function also.
Because they're not really documenting it with that,
Correct.
right? They're like,
Correct.
look, you're just a cosmic event.
Correct.
For you, present is all that matters.
Absolutely right. Very well said.
Yeah.
Very well said. But let's talk a little bit about your first book, the Kaal Darshana, which
Yeah.
is building blocks of time. And you just told me, responded to my first question, which is, the division of time into 24 hours and 365 days.
Right.
But what is the significance
Right.
of the way you have defined it in
Right.
your book?
Right. It's taken me 20 years of research,
Mhm.
right? And so, a lot of my friends ask me, why aren't you like really shouting at the top of a mountain? I said, you don't understand. This is such a profound and deep subject that for me to even shout out is a far call. Like for me, even to just stand up and say something, because, I can't just say one thing. I have to say the whole,
Correct.
right? So it's the same thing. I went through years and years of churn.
Mm.
It took me about 7 to 8 years to write the whole thing out.
Mm.
And I kept, debating, should I start with this? Should I start with this? Because, time is such a
Yeah.
humongous thing.
Mm.
That's when I got down to the Kāla Darshana, which is, building blocks. Like, where do you start? So the starting has to be the Puranas.
Mm.
You don't find a definition of time in the Quran. You don't find it in the Bible. You don't find it in science. Science doesn't understand time.
Mm.
Science can measure duration between two events,
Hmm.
but it does not understand time.
Hmm.
It doesn't have answers. What Google is telling you today is just data.
Hmm.
It hasn't really analyzed like how did it get to it, right? So when you get there, our division of time is not 24 hours actually,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Our division of time starts from the very basic, the blinking of an eye,
Hmm.
the shenu, the coming in of sun rays, right? Now, I'll have to just deviate a little
Yeah.
bit and
Yeah.
tell you the rishis, when you start to think, okay, if Big Bang really happened, the Big Bang is like a burst, boom,
Hmm.
right? If it happens, then it can keep expanding or it'll start contracting.
Yeah.
It can't stay there.
Hmm.
Either you're saying that we are in a momentary lapse of that movement,
Hmm.
we exist, which is fine. I'm okay to accept that.
Hmm.
But NASA today is reporting that the sun is moving away, the moon is moving away. Okay? So
Hmm.
let's park
Hmm.
this. The rishis essentially, if you read the Puranas like Vishnu Purana or Brahmana Purana, they categorically say that at that particular time, people had the ability of creating a baby just by a thought.
Hmm.
Brahma's Manasputra.
Hmm.
The reason why the British called it mythical is because
Hmm.
they're like, all this is, of course,
They
imaginary.
don't understand.
You don't understand it.
Hmm.
Fundamentally, what they're talking about, the power of the sun influencing you is
Hmm.
giving you a different kind of energy.
Correct.
Again, we've heard that, in Ramayana, Sri Ram might have been like 30 feet tall, Sri Krishna was 15 feet tall. How did it happen?
Hmm.
The increase of, like, as the sun moves away or the energy increases, basically the energy given to the humans and the plants is far higher. As it moves away, it, goes down.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if you understand that, you then come to the point that these guys were talking about things that they could observe that we can't today.
Hmm.
Okay. So anyway, Trishenu to Nimisha, which is the blinking of an eye. Then it talks about several things. Finally,
Hmm.
it gets to a point which is Ghatika,
Hmm.
which is the measurable entity, right?
Correct.
So then I started to analyze the Ghatika because this was something which is tangible, which is like, perceivable. So it's a particular pot, which is 288 grams in weight. It's got like a 1.4 millimeter hole, right? I'm talking about today's
Correct.
perspective.
Hmm.
This is not what
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
written in Dwapar, right?
Yeah.
And so that pot is called Ghatika here in
Hmm.
North. It's called Nazagai in Tamil Nadu.
Hmm.
It's called by their specific names in different parts of India
Hmm.
where they were measuring it, but all the names relate to a pot.
Hmm. Wow.
Ghat is Ghada,
Hmm.
Ghat.
Hmm.
The same word translates to Ghatna.
Hmm.
Same translates to Ghat,
Hmm.
right? The banks of a river, banks of the ocean.
Yeah.
So the time is related essentially to the high tide or the low tide.
Hmm.
If you now again, I'm not even going to venture into the structure of the universe,
Yeah.
the solar system, and all that. That's too deep.
Hmm.
But if you just were to observe this, the event that you can observe connected with the nature is only high tide and low tide. There's nothing else
Right.
you can observe.
Hmm.
So the measurement of time for them was Ghatika.
Hmm.
The Ghatika is essentially 60 Ghatikas in a whole day,
Wow.
sunrise to sunrise.
Hmm.
That's how they divide it.
Hmm.
But the fundamental thing when they're talking about a Ghatika that you have to go up and down
Hmm.
means the time is varying.
Right. How
So
amazing.
Ghatika is 60 and
Hmm.
Muhurtas are 30.
Hmm.
Now, why is it 30? Because now you get to Jyotish. By the way, in the past 7 years, then I just didn't get the answers. They were just not making sense.
Hmm.
And until it led me to Vedanga Jyotish. So I ended up studying Jyotish, became a Jyotish Pandita, and I
Okay.
realized, oh my God, the relationship Karaka is through a Muhurta.
Hmm.
And there are 30 intersections of the sun and the moon so there are 30 tithis.
Hmm.
15 waxing, 15 waning.
Hmm.
Okay. That is why it's 30 muhuratas in a day. Because it's related to relationships.
Correct.
So whenever you're starting, let's say want to get married,
Hmm.
on the right muhurata, get into good business, it's all about relationships,
Hmm.
right? And there's the element of
Yeah.
tattvas.
Yeah.
So that is where our measuring is of time.
Hmm.
24 hours comes from the fact that when a observer is observing at the horizon, the star sign that is rising
Mm.
is the rising sign of the horizon. It's called
Mm.
ascendant or lagna
Correct.
in Sanskrit. So the lagna is the one that it gives you two horas, like ahoratra, 12 during the day, 12 during the night.
Mm.
That ahoratra is what gives you hora.
Mm.
So you measure the hora
Mm.
as a division, but not as the measurement of time. The measurement of time is here. See, because if the angular distance increases, if the sun is moving away, the moon is moving away, the angular distance is increasing, the time taken would be longer.
Correct.
So we never measured with horas.
Mm.
We measured with ghatika.
Mm.
And when it takes some time to sink in,
Yeah.
because in the Puranas, it talks specifically, it says, look, there is nothing. Then there was Kāla, which is time.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Oppenheimer says, I am Vishnu, I become death. He's not saying death.
I
Kala
know.
obviously means death as well. He's talking about time. So Shri Krishna
Mm.
is time. He
Mm.
says initially there's Kala, that space that becomes that space and time are the same thing.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
Kala and space are the same.
Mm.
Now this says that Kala is the one that is determining your space,
Mm.
not the other way around.
Mm.
So time is the only non-negotiable.
Amazing. Amazing.
You can have all the riches in the world,
Mm.
every possible thing that you can imagine, and you have 1 minute to live.
Mm.
Versus you have absolutely nothing
Mm.
and you have eternity.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
Which
Brilliant.
is why all the asuras always asked for amritva.
Mm.
No asura said, give me 1,000 kgs of gold. They're
Mm.
like, right? So these are philosophical from a certain standpoint. The term spirituality, I actually don't agree with anymore.
Mm. Mm.
Because when you say spirituality, you're essentially just driving more towards the Vedas.
Correct.
But the Vedas are talking about dharma, which is essentially Kala
Mm.
and nature.
Mm.
But eventually it's all Kala.
Amazing.
We are fundamentally worshippers of time.
Mm. You know, today I won't talk about it, but I'm going to schedule another conversation with you, or maybe two or three conversations on the Vedas,
Yeah,
and
with
what,
you all anytime.
that's fantastic. But Ajay, now next question is that, and when I was reading some of the reviews of your books,
Yeah,
tell me the relationship between Kaal,
yeah,
Pran, and Ayurveda.
yeah. Again, we have this inherent ability of, okay, what is this there?
Mm.
What is that over here?
Mm.
These are fundamentally different things. Ayurveda is not like a, Western medicine system.
Correct.
Western medicine, and I love the West, by the way. So I have,
Mm.
I absolutely love the West. I'm
Absolutely.
in the US, a lot of my life is made over there. So I'm not going to say us and them. It's
Absolutely.
more of an understanding at a particular time.
Mm.
Like I genuinely believe that colonization happened out of immense ignorance, not like a conscious effort, right?
Mm.
Immense ignorance of like a handful, and
Mm.
then it just caught on, right? Because easy money is great. So people never really opposed it, right? It's a
Mm.
very tough thing to let go,
Mm.
right?
Mm. Mm.
So now let's come to this. So Ayurveda essentially, I've given that story in the book. I don't know
Yeah.
if you've read it,
Mm.
but about 5 years of immense pain, like through a workout, like I was doing lat pulls, experienced something in my spine, like a
Mm.
clicking sound. And then 5 years I was in tremendous pain. I couldn't, like, the doctors couldn't even diagnose what it was, let alone cure it.
Mm.
Finally, this Ayurveda Charya that I meet in Uttarakhand, and he just, merely in 5 minutes, he, presses one vein and cures it.
Wow.
So that, of course, makes you really curious because this is around the 9/11, time.
Mm.
I was in so much of pain. Finally, I just relented. I'm like, okay, great, I'll go. That changed the perspective because then it gave me another sort of avenue to explore. If we can't determine the timing, and Muhurta is what we have to resort to, if the medical science can't even cure, like diagnose my disease, let alone cure it, and Ayurveda Charya within seconds, within
Mm.
5 minutes,
Mm. Mm.
within 5 minutes, it was the time that I walked into his clinic to the time I walked out. It's done. I mean, that pain is gone.
Mm.
It was nothing short of a miracle
Yeah.
for all of 5 rupees,
Mm.
right? But then, I would have spent maybe about $20,000 over and above insurance.
Mm.
So that trigger then led me to start studying, of course, initially you start studying with, okay, what is Ayurveda? Like in a standard English book, you don't really capture the essence.
Yeah.
The typical Ayurvedic book or in a Gurukula, the starting is always with pranayam. Okay. Here, I'll just interject on another. If I ask people what is the word for belief in Sanskrit, the immediate response is Vishwas, and it's not. Belief lies in the root love, and Vishwas is V special, Shwas is the
Breath.
breathe. So when you start breathing consciously, you actually start connecting in a very different way. You are a lot better at telepathy. You're a lot better at perceiving things differently. The Ayurveda Acharyas essentially have gone through a immense sadhana when they've actually started to connect with the rest of the universe in a very different way. I mean, today quantum mechanics is talking about this. Like you can connect with the constellation there. How, right? And I'll explain that also. So that is fundamentally where it starts. An average human breathes 21,600 breaths, sunrise to sunrise.
Okay.
If you could reduce the breathing to half your breathing, you doubled your age.
Yeah.
You reduced it 1/4, you quadrupled your age. I mean, fantastic. If it's so easy, why isn't everyone doing it? You're not able to do it because you got so many distractions, right? And this is where I've given the example. I ask people, in these gatherings, I've been, invited to talks, and I say, Google who's the oldest person alive. Invariably, they come up with, search in Google, somebody, Tashikento, 117 years old, Japan, China, wherever. And I say, guys, if you've lived in India, 2022, there was a Padma Bhushan given by the President of India to a Swami Shivananda. He was 125 years old in 2022.
Wow.
2021. He's 129 today. He's in Haridwar, alive and kicking. Now, he is not, living long because he's popping proteins, supplements, working out, nothing. Totally breath work. He's a, yogacharya. So pranayam is the one that is leading to longevity. It is the one that is able to cure your diseases. So fundamentally, we are like this. The 72,000 nadis, the 72,000 gopikas of Sri Krishna, what they say, is actually the Manipura chakra, where 72,000 nadis congregate. And that is where the control is happening. If you are consciously breathing, right? Again, science would say that's not scientific. Yes, it's not scientific.
Yeah.
Exactly, precisely. If you are able to consciously, then you realize that you're expanding and contracting with the universe. And Ayurveda is basically just tapping that energy, right? Every single thing that they do. Again, I ask people, 15th century colonization, forget that. What did they start with? They started with spice trade.
Correct.
Why spices? I mean, people say, well, they didn't have any. Okay, fine. They didn't have any. So why did they want to trade it? Spices are what? Ilaichi, long, tezpatta, supari. It is all the spices that you're using in your Havan Samgri.
Correct.
These are the spices that a Ayurveda Acharya is telling you to eat. No Ayurveda Acharya is asking you to pop like a pill. He's saying, okay, great, take the, some hot water, take crushed ilaichi, crushed long, put some ginger, put some turmeric, and drink it every morning, empty stomach, and you're cured.
Yeah.
Right? Spices is where, and I've got like a separate chapter on Devi Devatas, right? And I can't talk about Devi Devatas without talking about Sri Ramanujam.
Correct.
So Srinivas Ramanujam, I mean, that's like a whole case study that we haven't even looked at. He's got like a whole scientific process on how he's connecting. See, Devi Devatas are, when they say they are a form of time, they're essentially cosmic events. And you're just connecting with that event using a certain spice and uttering a certain vibration, and you're able to connect. And that gives you, and he's clearly just like, he's like, I see a red screen, the formulas come there, and I give you. And the British mathematicians are trying to analyze, well, it must be some kind of intuition. No. He's telling you what he's doing. Why is right? So for us, I think it's so crazy that, we've been given like this code right in front of us. It's just a different kind of code. So it is all interconnected.
Very
A
interesting.
matter of time that we just sort of take into it.
Amazing, amazing. You know, can just keep on talking to you, but I'm going to defer our conversation on your second book, which is Kaal Gati, well,
Sure.
because I have two more time, time for two more questions for you.
Sure.
Um, and these are probably a little more general.
Sure.
Can you tell me a little bit about the significance
Yeah.
of the Vedic Panchangam,
Yeah.
and what is its relevance to predict cosmic events?
This is probably the most scientific thing that I've come across in my
Hmm.
entire life.
Hmm.
Okay. The fact that we've not even, ventured into understanding this. So Panchanga, as the name suggests, it's Panch
Right,
Anga,
absolutely. Hmm.
right? The Vedas are also Panch Anga.
Hmm.
Bhagavan, as we know it, we don't worship God. I mean,
Hmm.
God is like this unknown entity. Bhagavan is Bhumi, Gagan, Vayu, Agni, Neer.
Hmm.
So the Panchanga is connecting with the Panch Tattvo ka Bhagavan.
Hmm.
Okay. And that is then connecting to your five Gyanendriyas
Hmm.
and then making you act with your five Karmendriyas.
Hmm.
Our thoughts are not our thoughts.
Hmm.
I think that I'm thinking something, but it's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because if we were thinking for ourselves,
Hmm.
we'd actually all be thinking the same things,
Hmm.
but we're not. My thoughts are different from your thoughts,
Hmm.
and they're coming from somewhere. And people then go down to something very generic. Oh no, I want to be a billionaire. You want to be, they are very superficial. When you start to break it down, break it down, break it down, finally you get to it. Those thoughts are coming from somewhere else. That somewhere else is the root of your cosmic event. So the cosmic event that happened, essentially you're born here,
Hmm.
but there's a blueprint in the skies of the cosmic bodies.
Hmm.
That is the cosmic event, and you're basically that. Again, people say, no, no, I have a free will. Okay, fine, fine. What is a free will? You didn't decide where you were going to be born. You
Hmm.
didn't decide what your sex was going to be. You didn't decide who your parents were going to be.
Correct.
You didn't
Correct.
decide what your name was going to be. I mean, you
Hmm.
might say, well, I've changed my name. Fine,
Hmm.
right? So,
Hmm.
but 15% of your life you've determined now,
Hmm.
85% of that was completely not your call.
Right.
So that event that you're talking about is
Hmm.
basically that event. And
Hmm.
we're then mapping those events with the moving of these cosmic bodies.
Hmm.
A lot more to it, right? If it really was mythical, computer software wouldn't have the largest clients as astrology softwares.
Correct.
Today, after all the development in AI, finally it's just landed back into developing an astrological AI.
Hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
so the thing is that it is the consciousness which, interesting, the director of IIT, Dr. Behra, he and I started to talk about it. He says, and he's an electrical engineering professor.
Hmm. Hmm.
He's like one of the smartest guys that I know. He's like, Ajay, eventually you have to get to that last point, and
Correct.
that's consciousness.
Hmm.
You can't program it because it is not a mechanical universe,
Hmm.
right? So that is how you determine it. I
Wow.
mean, if time is not constant, then speed is not constant for light.
Hmm.
There is no gravitational constant, and it's varying. I mean, we've got practical examples now that we've proven it.
Hmm.
Over 5, 600, 700 years, it might stay relatively constant, but
Hmm.
so the cosmic event that we're talking about, how you predict it,
Hmm.
you technically don't predict like a mechanical prediction.
Ajay, my last question to you. How do you interpret the paradox of constants, such as time, light, and gravity? And you've spoken of light, time, and gravity already, but
Right.
tell me how these link up in the context of Vedic worldview.
So, okay, it might seem controversial. It might seem like, again, there is no us and them, there is
Yeah,
no that. I'm
yeah,
not at all blaming anybody. So please,
correct.
please don't take it that way.
Mm,
Throughout the history,
mm,
there have been events that you've studied and they're called mythical, for example.
mm, mm,
And invariably, this is exactly what has happened. So, we might feel that we are in the most advanced stage and we
mm,
are developing these scientific solutions.
mm,
That's the exact problem that people face all the
mm,
time.
mm.
Okay. In Ramayana, they say Ravan used to step on these grahas as his stepping stones.
Correct.
Okay. There's another story that I mentioned of Ripunjay, who was like the king of Kashi, who basically shunned out the Devatas. Essentially, he says, all these weekdays and all are, BS.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go back to, mechanical.
Mm.
Raman at one point also asks Shiva to come with him to Lanka.
Mm.
And when he refuses, the sky changes, right? Shiva is essentially, I mean, you got to understand that when there was Kaal had three gunas. It's Tamoguna, Rajoguna, and Satoguna.
Mm.
Right? So when you start to understand deeply, you realize that Rajoguna is the one that's giving you day and night.
Mm.
Sattva-guna is giving you the revolutions.
Mm.
Vishnu, that's the Palanhar, right?
Yeah.
The seasons are the ones that are maintaining us. In
Correct.
summer, I can have mangoes. In winter, I can have apples, like all that.
Mm.
Expansion is with Shiva. That's Rudra.
Mm.
So if expansion is happening with Shiva, that's something that I can't control, right?
Mm.
I can peg 25th December, 22,000 years ago. I can peg 24 hours as fixed. I can peg a second as fixed, but I can't control the expansion.
Mm.
When you understand that, then you realize the idea of fixing constants is phenomenally just that. It's not the first time that it's happened. It's happened many times before, right? Because the moment you start controlling something, then you become the master of that.
Correct.
The illusion or the delusion is really of controlling time, and you don't. Sri Krishna, he says, I'm Kāla, I'm time.
Yeah.
There's a story that goes of Yashodama. He's like a little kid. And she says, okay, don't play. I'm going to tie you now. She brings a rope and she tries to tie him, but the rope falls short.
Correct.
She brings a longer rope, tries to tie him, the rope still falls short. Right? And he's laughing. This is like a hilarious thing, right?
Yeah.
And then finally she says, please, my little Kana, tell me how, just don't. And so he says, okay, fine, now you can tie me. What they're trying to convey is that you can't control time with anger, with control. But with love, and we hear this, when in love, time stands still.
Time stands still, yeah.
I mean, these are the same things. We all know the same thing. So when it comes to constants, it's the same. We're trying to basically say, look, I've defined it. You cannot control it. So then I studied some works like with Dr. Rupert Sheldrake. He's done these experiments. He says, look, the meteorological department is actually changing these constants every year, not constants, right? And that is where we started to bond with Dr. Behera and I and several other people. We said, the idea is we need to reimagine science. We need to bring people together from across the world. This is not like us versus them. This is not about, guys, you're going to do this. And that is when Bhavishya Malika, the document, like the book that was written in the 15th century, started making sense.
Wow.
Because he says in the 20th century, a point will come that machines will start coming to a stop. Okay? With Microsoft, what was the first major crisis that happened? Y2K, related to time.
Yeah.
Microsoft has come to a world global standstill. It happened now. Boeing has gone down. I mean, Boeing is all cash business.
Yeah.
Right? With absolutely no competition. It's fundamentally your assumptions from 500 years ago are not standing true now.
Correct.
So we need to change our assumptions. The sustainability crisis today is fundamentally a difference between our assumptions and the reality today.
Absolutely right.
And today people are fighting for the assumptions. Guys, it's not an assumption fight.
Correct.
We need to change our assumptions. We need to reimagine science.
Wow.
That's where I was just completely blown. And it's fascinating to speak to somebody like you because you get it.
Yeah. No, this is so amazing.
Yeah,
and I could, Ajay, just keep talking to you. We haven't even scratched the surface of your first book, leave alone come to your second book.
But heard was due after 6 months.
Absolutely. So we'll come to that also once you publish. Right. But I just want to say what an enlightening conversation it has been for me. And I'm sure for my viewers and listeners. I'm very fascinated and read a lot of our scriptures. But, I just think I have not even scratched the surface of the scriptures and I was listening to you.
None of us have.
You've gone into a lot of depth, much more than I possibly can. But thank you for speaking to me. Sure. I'm going to write to you for another conversation very soon on your second book and on the Vedas. But thank you again and good luck to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.